All right. So, of course, before I begin, I wish I knew what there was to say about all of the unrest in our country, all of the people who are denying the rights of those for transgender people who need health care, for Black people being murdered by police, and others for the sin of our country that is white supremacy, for so much. I wish I knew what the words to say are. But of course, as minister, I have to have some words to say, right? The values that we each hold dear, we must continue to hold dear. We must continue to learn. We must continue to fight for our values. And when we see those values being denied, when we see the rights of others being denied, we must act. It'll be in small ways at first, small ways that these rights are being denied, but we each must, in the ways that we know best, fight for those rights. We must use the rage that I'm guessing some of you are feeling, and use that to do something more, to put that energy into action. I don't know what else to say. Feels like the road will be muddy and tough and rough, but we will get there. But we must continue to work to bend the arc of the universe towards justice, and also embrace the possibility that it might not bend towards justice, in which case we will need to be love's hands out in the world. We must be love's hands out in the world. Justice is what love looks like when we bring it into the public square. Have you ever noticed how the quality of conversations shifts when you know that departure is imminent? When someone has already said goodbye, have you ever noticed how long it takes to truly say goodbye? A few people have written this up as the Midwestern goodbye, which is apparently 9 steps long. This stands in direct contrast with ghosting and the quick exit that some folks do. The Midwestern goodbye, which I probably don't need to explain to you, but I found the pattern to be fitting, starts with someone standing up and saying, "Welp." Usually someone slaps their knees. Then there are the hugs. Then there's the walk to the door. Then there's the doorway chat, which could last 5 minutes to 45 minutes. Then someone will announce, "Well, we really should get going." Then there is a second round of hugs. Then another conversation while your hand is on the doorknob. Then the driveway conversations. And then the window wave as the car finally pulls away. Welp, I feel as though we are in the part of the doorknob conversation. We're in that part of the Midwestern goodbye. There is a certain tendency, I've noticed, that when relationships or partnerships are ending poorly, that both sides get a little feisty. Dear ones, I hope you know that this partnership, this ministry, has been good from my perspective. It would be unfair to saddle you with additional work or angst or disagreement. But also, I have now perspective on you as a congregation. I have a long view, a view from the balcony. You are a good and gritty congregation that deeply cares about one another. Lawrence, Kansas needs you. And I think you need to rise to that occasion. Do things as if they matter, because they do. They do matter a great deal. I was ordained 5 years ago. last week on June 6th, 2015. The closing hymn that day was the one that we listened to a few moments ago. I want to use the verses as a way to speak about our ministry together. It begins, "Wake now my senses and hear the earth call, feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving, as love shows us how." Continue, dear ones, to pay attention to the world around you. Do what you can to reduce our impact on the earth. Consider following the path of the Green Sanctuary program. Remember as well, in this time of continued physical distancing, that you are an interconnected web. What affects one of us affects all of us. I do not know how long we will be gathering virtually. I acknowledge that this will be tough. Even if we do everything right, as we consider reopening, cleaning, physical distancing, and other practices, we are only as safe as what our neighbors do when they aren't here as part of this congregation. I encourage you to still watch out for your neighbor and friend. This verse also reminds me to listen to the callings that exist within your community. Discerning what the universe needs and what Lawrence needs will likely not be what makes you comfortable. This will be challenging. It might be slow work, but it will be worth it. The next verse is, "Wake now, my reason, reach out to the new, join with each pilgrim who quests for the true, honor the beauty and wisdom of time, suffer thy limit, and praise the sublime." You have strong religious education programs. However, I think there is also a belief that they are only the responsibilities of the parents of the children, of the parents whose children are involved. If we are to be a faith that will exist in the coming years, it is past time to do something about raising the next generation of Unitarian Universalists. This is a duty of the entire congregation. Yes, parents will still bring their children to UUCL, but parents come as well for this community. When there are calls to help, please answer them, not just the parents and the caregivers of the children. I also encourage you to be humble, to think about someone else's position. I can think of so many times in my own life where I dug my heels in around a decision, made impassioned speeches, sent long emails. I learned it takes a lot of work to maintain something. It takes even more work to maintain or repair something that isn't working well. I encourage you to take a moment to view things from the other person's perspective. Every now and then ask yourself, what if I am wrong? I am not saying always be the devil's advocate. The devil does not need any more advocates. Rather, I'm saying view each other's perspectives with empathy. Listen without judgment and listen deeply. I'll get back to this in a little bit. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. One of the things that has impressed me about your congregation is how you care for one another. You step up when it needs to be done. On more than one occasion, people in this congregation have told me, we have this unwritten, unspoken rule, which I think is funny because you're telling me it's not unspoken anymore. We have this rule here that no one dies alone. That is beautiful. I've seen that in action. Maybe other congregations do this, but I'm not sure you do it well. I encourage you to continue to be welcoming and curious with newcomers in our midst. They will bring so many new gifts. They may also challenge us. That is fine. Somebody once said, I forget who it was, someone who thinks a lot about church and that sort of thing, in congregational life. Someone once said that the average Unitarian Universalist invites someone to congregation's services every 25 years. If it's been a while, consider forwarding the link to program or to worship to somebody that you think might benefit from our message. I also ask you to consider this, to consider how you treat one another. We are a congregation that welcomes all families, and sometimes family might be a single person. It might be more than that. When I look out at you on the Zoom room, I know that there are people who are fighting all sorts of battles. Remember that when you interact with someone, you might not know what is going on in their life. The next verse, wake now my conscience with justice thy guide, join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Now, this verse speaks so deeply to everything that is going on in our world right now. This verse also reminds me of a fantastic sermon from the Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd. In 2016, she delivered a sermon at General Assembly that has stuck with me in large ways. I tried to pick a little bit, but it's just so good. So here's a fair bit of the sermon. Nancy MacDonald Ladd writes this, and it's an unusual segue, but here goes. You know, in WrestleMania, when professional wrestlers have those fake fights, sometimes they are really at risk of getting hurt. And do you know what they do before the muscle snaps or the bone breaks in the fake fights? They tap out. They bang on the mat. When the fake fight gets close to having real consequences, they tap out. I tell you what, I'm tapping out right now, and I invite you to join me. I'm tapping out of every fake fight in our congregations and our movement about getting what I want or what you want or what we think we want, because the stakes are too high and we don't have time for fake fights anymore. A fake fight about the bylaws in the annual meeting is often a carefully concealed real fight about the values that undergird our history, coming into relationship with the values that may undergird our future. If we can get past duking it out over the paint color in the church bathroom, we may encounter a pastoral window into the inner life of one whose voice in the world seems increasingly powerless. And all lives matter, yes, that one, chief among the fake fights, and cover conversations that distract from the work that is at hand. It's not about the slogan. More often than not, it's about our deep and abiding resistance to actually taking on the systemic white supremacy that eats at the heart of us and our culture. I know, Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd writes, for a fact that the real conversations are waiting just beneath the surface of the fake fight is the actual encounter, soul to soul, hand to hand, in which change is possible. So let's have that conversation, the real one, the hard one, the one which requires us to keep showing up. And let's do it with edge and forgiveness, calling out and calling in, calling forth a new kind of community, both in our congregations and in the world, she continues on. The real fight beckons. The real conversations about our identity, our relevance, our resistance. The world does not need another place for like-minded, liberal-leaning people to hang out together, to fight about who's in charge. The world does not need a place where you or I or any of us is going to get what we want. What the world needs is a movement, like ours to step more fully into our higher calling to serve as an instrument for encounter with one another, with the holy, and with the world, so that we might love more fully and speak more truly and serve with greater efficacy. There are far too many people, we're just about done with her sermon here, whose rights are being denied. Far too much work to be done to spend time on fake fights, my friends. Oh no, I guess this is actually, these are my words now. You do a wonderful job of, however, at being a prophetic witness, about showing up in our yellow shirts to vigils and protests and lobbying our legislators in Topeka. I fear, though, that we are just getting started in this journey of bending the arc of the universe towards justice. Just this week, there has been so much to do. So many people whose rights, whose inherent worth and dignity is being ignored. We must be watchful. The final verse. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care. Now, when I first encountered this hymn in seminary, I had certainly sung it before in congregational life when I was growing up. But the first time I encountered it in seminary, I leaned over to whoever was standing next to me in worship after we were done singing and said, I want to sing that song at my ordination. And so we did. Congregations founded during the fellowship era are beautiful. They are powerhouses with devoted lay leaders. And they sometimes aren't sure about how to interact with a minister. There are often differing levels of trust. Many people come to Unitarian Universalism because of a poor interaction with faith leaders of other denominations. They bring that feeling to a new religious setting, and because of that mistrust, that's often projected onto the ministerial figure. Or there have been ministerial figures in Unitarian Universalism that have lost your trust. I recognize that. I recognize that, and I'm sorry for that pain that has caused. I encourage you to continue to have conversations about your partnership with ministers. You, by my count, have co-ordained 4 ministers: Jill Jarvis, John Coffey, Jordan Nelson Long, and Rebecca Gant. And you have had another as an intern in Elizabeth Ide. This history, in this amount of time, in a fellowship, in a former fellowship, is unusual. It is a gift. Your help with ministerial formation is a gift to our movement. I brought my gifts and used them the best that I could, and I know that Reverend Shelley will do the same. And you too have a ministry. Ministry is the thing that each one of us has, whether or not we have Rev at the beginning of our name. You each have a ministry. You do ministry when you show up in Topeka to advocate for better access to health care. You do ministry when you wash dishes after a potluck. You do ministry when you call a member of the congregation up on the phone and check in with them, or when you sit next to them at their deathbed. You have ministry when you teach religious education, when you convene program, when you sing. Ministry is, in a way, the act of actively participating in the life of this congregation. And I thank each one of you for your ministry and what you have done during this time that we have been together. And so, my friends gathered here, I have one more service with you. And that service will be about thanks and thanksgiving and gratitude. May we each remember that our world needs us. Are we ready to do what the world needs? May we find ways to mingle your calling with all who will share as we work toward a planet transformed by our care. For so For the last 2 years, this congregation has been ours, and soon, not quite yet, but in a little bit, it will be your congregation once again. May we each work to make this congregation the best that it can possibly be, because our world needs it so deeply. May it be so.